And thank you to Luca and Expert Agile Club for giving me this opportunity. This is a great chance to talk to you all. And just as a quick note of introduction, I did actually give this talk, or a very similar one to it, at a University of Maryland project management symposium. So as you can see here, it's basically the same, more or less the same presentation that I gave at that talk earlier this year. However, recognizing that this is an agile organization, and most of the trainings and events are agile related, I did kind of review it with an eye to agile, and I'd like to cover that more during the Q&A period, as it doesn't really pertain to most of the topics, as you're going to see, but I would like to cover those aspects later, and I welcome any kind of questions in that realm of, how agile might kind of fit into this, or how it's relevant to agile. So that would be a great angle for me to cover, kind of in addition to my core talk. So with that, I'm going to start off here and welcome everyone again. So as has already been said, my name is Mark Porter. I've been a project manager for over 10 years. Started off supporting international scientific training programs for the Department of State. And then after that, I had a brief stint as a Census Bureau contractor, updating the address canvassing operations for Census 2020. But I am currently a project manager at the University of Maryland Unmanned Aircraft Systems Test Site, and we're located in St. Mary's County, Maryland. All right. And let's see, go forward here. All right, and then so as a brief note of introduction, this is a highlight reel. There's no audio, so your computer's fine. It's not supposed to transmit any sound. Just look at the video and watch for some of our highlights, and then I'm going to pick up after this is over. It's approximately a minute. So anyway, here goes. All right. So, all right, and then here's my mugshot. Okay, so now my current assignment at the UAS test site, it took some learning and adjustment because aviation and unmanned systems were new technical areas for me. The test site is also a small office with 8 staff, and my previous workplaces had either around 100 or a few thousand people. So these were certainly both different work environments. And it's been a rewarding journey, and I feel very fortunate to be where I am right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my best practices for managing projects, as well as some unique challenges that we faced and my take on future trends for our industry. But the main message that I want all of you to come away with from this talk is that managing government projects is challenging, but we at the test site are able to overcome those challenges and manage unique government projects to achieve challenging research objectives. So the Navy and the University of Maryland are both large, complex organizations. Although UMD is itself a large entity, the UAS test site is a small satellite office within the UMD organizational structure. Therefore, it has many similarities to a small startup in some ways compared to a large university organizational environment. In addition, each organization has different procedures and objectives. For example, the Navy is primarily focused on defense and national security, but they also prioritize research. UMD focuses on research, but also puts a large emphasis on publishing and research credit. So, in contrast, the Navy usually specifies that any reporting from a Navy project needs to be reviewed first before it can be published. And this creates a dilemma that needs to be resolved before we can execute a contract. Each organization also has several different programs and departments that are involved with test site projects. And it can be challenging to make sure that all these various entities are updated efficiently. Each department tends to have its own specialized function or expertise, and they're not usually required to know how their part fits into the big picture. And that's where my role as the project manager comes in, to make sure that all these various pieces of the process are being efficient and that they're all working well together. So how do we manage all of the pieces of this puzzle? I'm going to talk about the techniques that I use to manage projects at the test site. So managing remote teams is always a challenge, but this was especially compounded with the recent pandemic situation. It became very difficult to hold in-person meetings, especially if they involved any type of out-of-state or international travel. So this definitely increased our reliance on video conferencing and on virtual meetings. So how does one make up for the lack of in-person connection and interaction while still managing to achieve effective results? Well, I found that actively promoting dialogue with the team does help. I've also found that focusing on outputs over process and remaining very flexible are also both keys for adapting to a remote team environment. Finally, I've found that making an effort to recognize team members for their contributions and hard work is also important with a remote working arrangement. After all, many of us have now come to realize that it can be challenging to stay as visible and as engaged with your team during a full-time telework situation. I also found that this was particularly challenging for me because I'm a very social person and I thrive on in-person interactions. So this situation forced me to adapt to a new reality where managing from a distance is the new default. So although we've been primarily teleworking over the past year, we are still able to perform live drone operations for our naval sponsors. So here's a recent example from just last year. On October 14th, 2020, our engineer and also pilot, Josh Gauss, flew an M600 drone. equipped with an EPA-provided Colibri air emission sensor. And he flew it over a column of flame at Naval Support Facility Indian Head. The flame rose from a burn pit on base, which was designed to decontaminate materials that have explosive residue. This operation assisted a research group from Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA's, Office of Research and Development, and the Naval Surface Warfare Center, or NSWC, Indian Head Division, with tests of a new, more environmentally friendly burn unit. Data from this operation will be used to validate the new explosives decontamination unit. And the new propane-fueled burn unit is expected to produce much lower emissions compared to the existing wood-fired unit. Most of this project work was managed remotely through email and web meetings. However, Josh and I were still able to both attend the burn operation at NSF Indian Head while following all the necessary COVID restrictions. We have a team of 8 staff at the test site, and we plan on organizing one operational team for large fixed wing UAS, and then another team for small multi-rotor UAS. But in order to get approval to hire more staff, we must first show that there's a contract in place that proves the demand is there. So often this becomes a chicken or the egg type of dilemma, as we would need the staff already in place to bid for the work. So the team dynamic changes when you have a team that grows from, say, 5 to 8 people to 10 or 12 people. And then this dynamic changes more dramatically when you scale up to 20, 30, 50, 100, etc. Reporting structures and assigned responsibilities need updating when new people are brought on board. Office space is another limitation. When we were just starting out, we had more space than we needed. So we rented out one hangar for extra revenue. But now, since we've become busier, we really can make use of this extra space. So we reclaimed Hangar 3 from our former tenant, and we've already filled the space. And since we have a small operations team, it can be challenging to manage all of our assigned work. We currently have one chief pilot and 2 engineers, but we receive many inquiries and teaming offers for UAS work. We need to balance these opportunities with our current commitments and carefully manage our available capacity. So how do we accomplish this? First, by communicating clearly and often with our team and with external clients and partners. And then by managing expectations with all the stakeholders, and by being very careful and strategic with our time commitments. So there's also the consideration of funded project work versus work that has a benefit to society. Sometimes these opportunities are worth the involvement of the test site and University of Maryland as charitable or as in-kind contributions. Each business lead is carefully evaluated by our management team, and we're constantly discussing new ideas and proposals with our networks. Despite having a small core team at the test site, we're still able to accomplish big things and push the technical envelope. So a good example of this comes from another of our Navy projects, where we performed a technical demonstration for the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Panama City Division, and Alliance Science and Technology. We completed this demo on September 20th, 2018. Our engineers, Josh Gauss and Lu Duong, previously converted a small remote-controlled life-saving boat into an autonomous vehicle, which is what you see here in the picture. Once this integration was complete, they successfully navigated this boat almost a mile offshore using radio signals relayed from a Phoenix 60 UAS soaring overhead. The same telecommunication link was also used to broadcast video from the boat and transmit audio from the team on the ground and a crew on the water. For the naval engineers observing, the test was early evidence that a wireless mesh network powered by Silvus radios expands the communication reach of vessels and shore facilities used in naval operations. So having a small team meant that one person needed to take on multiple roles as needed here, or wear multiple hats. So Josh, he integrated the life-saving boat with an autopilot, but he also drove the boat during the demonstration and he operated the onboard camera. So in a similar vein, I plan project activity and I set up contracts, but I also go out in the field and I act as a data recorder or as a visual observer sometimes as needed. This is one way that we efficiently use our limited team resources. So when I started at the test site, we were very conscious of the need to be strategic with our time commitments. UMD, like many universities, does not track labor hours. However, the government definitely does track labor hours, and they've often asked us for these details. The Navy is used to receiving this information routinely from defense contractors, and at first they were very surprised to hear that we don't track our labor in this way. So this has been a challenging issue to reconcile. So we developed an alternate way to estimate our level of effort on our Navy proposals. So in addition, the Navy always held lots of meetings ever since I've started, and they've needed us to participate in some way, or to at least have one or two people sit in, etc. But it wasn't always simple to cover the administrative side with such a small team. More recently, our challenge has been more related to using all of our allocated funds in the time given. Once the Navy obligates funding, they want to make sure everything is spent by the end of the contract period. Any remaining funding leads to a lot of questions, and everyone wants to avoid this situation if at all possible. So, besides the differences in tracking labor, our objective to do good differentiates us from many for profit companies and other types of organizations. In addition to my government portfolio, I also manage a few other efforts in the academia and the commercial sectors. The test site seeks out projects where our impact can provide a benefit to society at large. To give you a recent proposal example, we're reviewing participation with the Kashmir World Foundation, or KWF, to redesign a high altitude blended wing body UAS called Eagle Ray. KWF plans to operate Eagle Ray in Nepal to assist with snow leopard conservation and anti poaching efforts. For a recent operational example, we assisted relief organization Global Medic with a disaster mapping operation in the Bahamas in 2019. Our engineer, Josh Gauss, flew a drone to generate a comprehensive map of hurricane damage on Grand Bahama Island. This project, which was managed by Jim Alexander, my manager, assisted the Bahamanian government and the aid relief organizations with the recovery effort. This effort presented many project management challenges, including securing host country approvals, shipping the required equipment to the area with limited infrastructure, and integrating and refining all the recorded video footage into a finished project. Another of our humanitarian projects would end up becoming our most well-known accomplishment. On the night of April 19th, 2019, test site staff flew a custom UAS almost 3 miles to the rooftop helipad at the University of Maryland Medical Center, or UMMC, in Baltimore. The UAS carried a live human kidney, which was intended for a transplant operation at the hospital. This was the first time in the world that such a drone flight had taken place. The kidney was soon on its way to the operating room where transplant patient Trina Gillespie waited. The delivery drone flight was the culmination of many months of testing, coordination, and planning with the test site, University of Maryland Medical System, or UMMS, and many other stakeholders. The project management challenges for this effort included scheduling multiple Maryland and federal agencies for airspace approvals and road closures, as well as defining the requirements for a custom UAS to transport the organ. Gillespie is doing very well and has returned to many of her former activities. The technology that made her recovery possible has also flourished. Members of the original project team at the test site partnered with an investor to found Mission Go, a company that's developing and expanding this technology and increasing organ donation efficiency through a new software product. So, establishing trust and company culture are two of the biggest challenges to overcome when managing remote teams. In our case, part of the test site is still working in the hangars, since drone integrations and test flights need to be done in person. For myself and my manager, Jim Alexander, we've only been in our office a handful of times since March of last year. But I've found that following through on my commitments is the primary way to support this trust culture. I've also found that telling the truth, even when it happens to be bad news, or especially when it's bad news, is essential to maintain trust within the team. Also, showing compassion is a vital part of establishing this culture. Our hybrid in person and remote working arrangement also creates a need for other morale building activities, such as virtual happy hours and other team building events from the University of Maryland Department of Aerospace Engineering and from the A.J. Clark's School of Engineering. I had also accompanied the operations team out in the field several times in the past to manage my projects. And this included activities like interfacing with the clients, recording data, and acting as a visual observer. This hybrid arrangement meant that I wasn't able to provide this support in many cases. So we had to adjust our approaches and our procedures to be able to accomplish our field operations. So, a good example of one of our current efforts that's focused on building trust, it's the Chesapeake UAS Route Network, or CURN, CURN. The test site is working with the Maryland Department of Commerce, academia, partnering industry stakeholders, and aviation and UAS subject matter experts, or SMEs, to create a CERN, or Chesapeake UAS Route Network, overlying the Chesapeake Bay. The principal objective of CERN is to enable operational users to achieve safe, repeatable, routine, on demand network access to non segregated airspace. So, what does that mean, or how are we going to go about it? Well, we're going to use a mixture of current and former UAS and network communications, navigation, and surveillance infrastructure. And this will include the ability to perform advanced UAS beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS, and flight over people operations. Now, both of these capabilities have been on the UAS industry's wish list for many years, and this effort will greatly increase the public's trust in UAS operations. And when this route network is shown to work for many different UAS applications on a large scale, then it's a whole other level. It's a whole new ballgame. The project management challenges for this effort, though, are considerable. And so they include managing many different stakeholders, including government, academia, and industry, getting public approval of the concept, and securing the necessary funding over multiple fiscal years. It's no small feat. These challenges are tough, but the potential future payoff is huge. Now, the world of unmanned aircraft systems is very competitive and it's constantly changing. And there's many players involved in the space, including other universities, private companies, and government agencies. So how will the UMD UAS test site stay relevant in this field? And also, why would a funder or a partner decide to work with us instead of with one of the other available alternatives out there? Well, in a short time, we've made a name for ourselves with FAA Certificate of Waiver or Authorization or COA applications, also airworthiness evaluations, and with getting customer research airborne, whatever form that might take or whatever the requirements are. That's really one of our specialties. And so we've delivered the first human organ for transplant surgery by drone. I mean, and that's pretty amazing if you ask me. But anyway, despite the progress that we've made so far, there is constant pressure to adapt, to innovate, and to stay current in this high tech industry. So the Navy wants their partners to fly multiple vehicles for live flight testing. And this is because the systems that they are testing are designed to track dozens of assets. For most of these tests, some number of real vehicles are joined by many more virtual assets. And these exist only in the testing environment. However, the more vehicles that can be flown in the real world, then the more scenarios and variables that can be tested. Now, this raises the level of complexity and also the number of pilots and engineers that are required. We will need to keep these requirements in mind as the test site scales up to support these test and development activities. Establishing detailed requirements with the Navy has been one of our greatest challenges in terms of managing government projects. Having some understanding of the technical aspects involved does help with planning these projects. However, since so many of the related technical fields involve deep specialization, we really need to rely on our pilots, our engineers, and our researchers for the necessary inputs. So while we've mostly focused on airborne unmanned systems, we have heard a lot of interest in having multiple domains work together on common scenarios. In one example, an airborne asset communicates with a surface boat, and then the boat communicates with a diving vessel. The diving vessel requests some video data on some object of interest at some location on the river floor. Okay, so designing and testing such a scenario raises the complexity level. This is in order to have multiple systems all communicate with each other and all track their relative positions. So these are the challenges that we are getting ready to tackle for our next round of the multi-domain unmanned system demonstrations. So one upcoming development that will help with our multi-domain unmanned systems efforts is right down Airport Road from our office. The Southern Maryland Autonomous Research and Technology, or SMART building at the University System of Maryland at Southern Maryland, or USMSM, will be an $86 million, 84,000 square foot academic and research facility. It's scheduled to open in fall of 2021, not very far off at all. The innovation half of the SMART building will feature a massive unmanned autonomous systems, or UAS, research facility, which will include sea, air, and land capabilities. The facility will make USMSM the only Maryland regional higher education center with a research component. This research component was created through a partnership with the test site. And this arrangement will greatly increase our capacity to manage autonomy projects. Unmanned systems are one of the biggest areas of emerging technology. So, unmanned systems will greatly transform industries like logistics and supply chains, personal transportation, data collection. and security. In fact, in the future, there will be few sectors that will not be transformed by these innovations. Companies like Google, Amazon, and Uber are all spending big, and many players are vying to be the primary providers of these emerging applications for unmanned technology. It can be daunting to survey this landscape and then wonder what part will the UMD UAS test site play in all of this. However, as a facility that's focused on unmanned technology, we have the important capabilities and resources to play a key role in advancing the adoption of unmanned systems in new areas. With support from University of Maryland and with our crucial partnerships in academia, in government, and in private industry, of course, the University of Maryland UAS test site is well positioned to continue thriving and staying relevant in this booming field. All right. And I just want to close by saying thank you all very much for your time. I'm happy to take some questions from the audience. I believe we have a lot of time left. So I'm happy to, I'll stay till the end and I'm happy to answer any questions. And thanks again. I appreciate it. Great opportunity for me.
Feel free to put your questions in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask any questions.
I can go ahead and stop sharing now, I guess, right? Or I don't know.
Yep, or you can leave it on that, whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, I'll leave it up for now, but
that's fine.
Whichever. Yeah, whatever works. Either way is fine.
So Mark, a question that I have, which I don't really know a whole lot about UAS. I don't own any drones or anything along those lines, but initially, I guess I was thinking about maybe larger unmanned things when I saw the title of your talk. But it's pretty cool, the stuff, especially like delivering the organs and stuff. But do you guys work with things that are not necessarily like that you see in the movies when they like fly drone planes over other countries and stuff? You guys are much more domestic in what you operate. And then are you guys testing and figuring out new ways to use unmanned smaller vehicles as your main focus?
Yeah, well, those, first of all, thank you. Those are some really, really good questions there. I think you touched on a lot of really good topics. Hopefully I can answer and maybe, have some follow-up discussions or, but anyway, yeah. So your first question is, whether we kind of work with any of the larger drones and kind of, some of these overseas operations, like, military applications, etc. I don't know, like Triton, Global Hawk, or Predator, some of those examples. So that anything from like, I'd say group 4 and group 5, I mean, there's the 5 kind of main categories for UAS for, DoD military. Group 5 are, the huge ones like Triton, that are massive, and all the way down to group 1, which are like tiny little quadcopters, mini copters, whatever. So we're not really, first of all, so getting to the topic of overseas stuff, we we have done some overseas work. I would say it's not a huge focus for us. We've been to Thailand, we've been to Dominica, we've been to a few other countries around the world for specific events. The time we were in Thailand, it was actually a Navy demonstration, like technical exercise. So so a lot of what we do is pretty much tied in with Navy, DoD, Army, as well as not just military, but we do a lot of work with NASA, NOAA, other federal government agencies, as well as like state of Maryland agencies. So I mean, a whole variety, as well as private companies. So there's a whole variety, but I'd say we're not really, for the way that you kind of put it, we're not really as involved as far as like overseas, like flying the larger drones. I'd say mostly that's I mean, I think that there are contractors, and I mean, it's a lot of it's just government, but there's contractors involved in different. I'm honestly not that up to speed. I mean, I'm aware of some of it, but we don't really, I guess, focus on that. I guess, yeah, like a lot of what we do is locally based and domestic, so a lot of that is just like your standard. A lot of the times, I mean, we've used DJI. I mean, of course, now that's a whole other topic of like whether or not we need to keep using those, or whether the government's getting away from that, yada, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so we've used a lot of those standard quadcopters and kind of workhorse things. We built a custom one for the organ delivery, because that was such a critical application where a human organ, you want to make sure you're as safe as humanly possible, basically, like have as many redundant systems as possible. Most drones are not built, like the cheap ones that you can get off the shelf, or the the hobbyist toy ones, are not built with safety and redundancy in mind, and reliability. They're just kind of like it. So that in that case, it's really warranted, where we put a lot of time and effort into designing something that even if like one motor controller dies, the other one's still working. Even if two of the propellers stop spinning, the rest of them can still right themselves, and they can do an emergency landing, and all that was planned out well in advance, and all these contingencies, and lots of those different scenarios. So anyway, but so hopefully that, so yeah, and so that's, I'd say, and we, one other note, I guess, we do, we're not, we want to stay involved with sort of group 3 and larger, your larger fixed wing platforms. We haven't done as much of it. We, up until fairly recently, we were involved in some larger fixed wings with the Navy, but we've been kind of there's been kind of different demand signals from our sponsors, and things are kind of reorganizing. So we're sort of we're going to stay involved in the group 3 and larger, but kind of what form that's going to take, I would say, really is going to depend on what the specific needs and requirements are, and sort of the whatever opportunities we happen to be teamed up on. So to be continued, but that's definitely an area we're going to keep building on, as well as supporting the smaller ones. So hope that answered your question. Sorry if I may have
Yeah, and in your video
you
you showed that, yeah, you guys do a little bit with humanitarian aid and stuff, and so just to understand a little bit more of the work that you guys do, is it more that the military comes and engages you, or since you're talking about managing the projects and then having to take it from an ideation to a fulfillment, who is it that you view like as the key customer that's coming and starting you on these new projects?
Sure. Yeah, that really good question. So now in my case, I'm one project manager, but I don't have all the projects at the test site. My manager, Jim Alexander, is also a project manager. He's now the I guess his formal title is project lead and chief of safety. So I report to him, and he has his portfolio in addition to sort of managing me as a project manager. So I mean, it's not always the military or the Navy. For my particular portfolio, I'd say most of my projects have been with the Navy. Like Pax River is probably I'd say our main sponsor. As I mentioned in my talk, we've done some work with NAVSEA at Panama City. We've done some work with Indian Head, Lakehurst, a few other places. But so I'd say for me, a lot of what I do is initiated by the Navy. Usually it's like an ongoing effort, or we might talk about specific proposals with them, and refine it and eventually get that awarded. We might team with somebody else on some technical demonstration, depending on how those opportunities come up. And more recently we've been you may have heard there's a Army Research Lab cooperative agreement University of Maryland has just executed in the last month or two, and now that's going full steam, and we're getting a lot of efforts with autonomy, AI, and it involves us, it involves lots of other people at University of Maryland. So it's a huge ongoing effort. So that's another huge area for potential future efforts. But actually, sorry, getting back to your question. So for other efforts, it's not always the Navy or the military. Sometimes we have an idea. Sometimes we do internal research, for example, with our interns. We have stuff that impact our own operations or for our own benefit that we take on. Sometimes our sponsors are other people at University of Maryland come to us because different departments want to work with us with drones, and they don't have their own expertise in house. So we've done a few of those types of arrangements. And obviously, like I mentioned, other parts of the government come to us and sponsor projects. NASA, NOAA, for example, are two of the big ones that Jim manages as part of his portfolio. Private companies come to us, defense contractors, all sorts of very different funders and researchers have kind of come and gone and pitched different ideas over the years. So there's been a lot of them, and it's actually something I'm trying to pay a closer attention to and kind of get more prioritized, because it's lately it's being become more and more of a focus of my own efforts. So anyway, but long story short, that's kind of how our projects go, and how they get initiated. So I'll just stop there. But thanks, great question.
I've got one more follow-up that's related
Sure.
to kind of the series of them here, if everybody else can
go
humor
right
me
ahead.
just for a moment, because where I'm going with it now is, now that we know a little bit more about who your customers are,
Sure.
and then how you work with them. So my question then is, when you had mentioned at the beginning that in the Q&A is when we would tie a little bit to Agile. So is it that when you're working with your customers, would you view yourself as an entity that focuses in the project management more from a waterfall perspective, or do you blend your methodologies depending upon what the customer is? And then is it that you guys are making decisions about how you're going to operate, or is the customer asking you how to operate? And ultimately where I'm going with trying to understand a little bit more of that intake is, then how do you collect the requirements and then transition that into having an ongoing, the whole idea with Agile is working in iterations. So they're able to show the customer the progress that you're making. And even if you don't call it Agile, how do you stay engaged with your customer to make sure that you're able to show them the effort is advancing, and getting those quick check-ins to get feedback before you go too far and they say, no, that's not what I really wanted?
Okay, no, good, great follow-up questions, and I see where you're going with that. I appreciate that the Agile tie in there. As I mentioned, I didn't really talk a whole lot about Agile, so I'm happy to get this opportunity during the Q&A to get more of that tied in with this. So okay, to answer your question, I would say for the vast majority of the projects that I've done at my current job, and probably the same would apply to my other two positions as a project manager, they've almost always been waterfall based. Now I say that with a slight caveat or footnote. I know that federal government in general has started talking a lot more about Agile. Some parts of the federal government have actually switched to Agile and are actively implementing it, and they're completely sold on the Agile approach and sort of restructuring and everything that goes along with that, the sprints and the et cetera. So now in my case, we at the test site, I'd say we're majority, if it's a hybrid approach, I'd say it's the majority, like maybe 80-90% easily is the waterfall. The reason for that is because it's tied in with the requirements of our sponsors. And in this case, the Navy, NOC AD at Pax River is very much still in the yearly budget cycle, yearly BAA, white paper, full proposal, long, iteration process of a lot of back and forth to get a contract set up, something you've started, several months before, and then you budgeted based on, what you think, something's going to cost, or what you're going to charge them for a certain level of effort or whatever, some mark you've set several months ago, you're finding yourself having to backfill and sort of adapt to the changing environment. By the time the actual thing is signed, it's like, oh, when we submitted this 7-8 months ago, we didn't know anything about the budget for this or how we were going to set this up. Now we know, but we're stuck to this budget that we sent that got approved 7-8 months before, and there's no way to we'd have to restart the whole thing. So obviously, as you all probably know, I'm sure that that is one of the main drawbacks of waterfall. You've got, it's like you're setting this target a year in advance, and you're trying to be as accurate as you can, and then invariably things are going to change. One of the big attractions or advantages of Agile is that every 2 weeks or so, you are having these, kind of readjust, and you have this sort of constant engagement with the sponsor, whether it's, sponsor, product owner, whatever roles or names you're assigning. The person that's funding the effort is a lot more involved if you're, going by an Agile framework, or if you've implemented some form of Agile, Scrum, or et cetera, et cetera. So I say that as a, somewhat regretfully, because I personally, I've studied Agile and Scrum, and I have the certification. For me, it was mostly, I wanted to stay current in the field. I wanted to learn these things and kind of, what other people were doing, what the best practices were. I would say it's kind of a shame that I haven't had more opportunities to use it. And there are a lot of advantages to doing things the Agile way. But I think that a lot of the times what needs to happen is like an organizational transformation, basically more or less the ground up, I would say. So you would, I think you would need something where University of Maryland made like a decision for a sweeping change, to where you'd have all the departments and divisions and units kind of reorg and restructure, and have this new, have a self-organized, self-managing team that, and et cetera, and the every 2 weeks have the Scrum. Now what happens is, I find that that sometimes that happens on a smaller scale, right? Like you might have a certain department or a division or a satellite branch or whatever. It's like, okay, now we're all organized as, we're implementing things the Agile way. We're not, stuck to this waterfall method or our old management structures and silos, et cetera. But I feel like with the University of Maryland, I kind of compare it to what's going on right now with Elevate. So Elevate is a huge IT effort that's, taking place over several years, probably, 5 to 7 years, give or take. It's a long time scale, and it's basically changing almost all of their IT systems. It's, reworking everything, combining, getting rid of some redundant things and the way things are linked and all of that. And so I feel like the reason I mentioned that is, I feel like an Agile transformation for University of Maryland would be a similar effort. It would be a huge, it'd be on a large scale, it'd be multi-year, probably big budget. I don't know, what it would be, ballpark, but it's a big change. Yes, I mean, if you convince all the decision makers that Agile's the way to go, and it's worth putting in the time and effort to do this, then yeah, I mean, that's great. I also find that Agile work environments are probably better suited for, so in the IT world, you have these development teams that are kind of co-located. You have coders, you have front end developers, et cetera, et cetera, UX people, all these specialists, but they're kind of like hanging out in a startup place and working together, and there's a break room and stuff. So we have some of those aspects. I mean, not exactly like that, but the test site, it's a small office. It kind of is a startup atmosphere. There's a lot of younger interns and young engineers there that are kind of so you kind of have some but really the management and the reporting structures, it's still kind of top down hierarchical, as far as they report to their boss approves, blah blah blah. It's tied to this year-long planning cycle. So but no, within that you have, so okay, say Josh, Grant, and Darren, our pilot and our two engineers, say they're all kind of working on something. So in the framework of what's already been approved in this sort of traditional waterfall environment, you might have them kind of doing sort of informal sprints and scrums and whatever. I mean, I feel like they are very self-organizing and self-sufficient in a lot of ways. but not to the extent of a full Agile, implementation. I wouldn't say it's truly an Agile approach in all of those. You wouldn't check all the boxes, but it does, have some similarities there. And that's what I would say overall is, we have kind of like a few Agile kind of aspects to how we do things and manage projects. It's definitely not full on Agile. It's still tied into this sort of waterfall, methodology, which, I mean, yeah, in some cases it can actually work well. And I'm not saying waterfall is always, counter indicated or you should never use waterfall. I'm just saying that, obviously in a lot of industries, people have realized that Agile has a lot of advantages. They've done studies, they've shown kind of side by side comparison. Agile works better. This is what we found through our own practice. We've proved it to ourselves, and a lot of people have kind of adopted that. I mean, there's been such a wave of it, really, for many years now. I mean, this isn't a new transformation or a new paradigm shift by any means. So anyway, so I'll just stop there and just say that's kind of how things have been going as far as Agile or waterfall at the test site.
All right, thanks. Yeah, and I guess the part that I wasn't thinking about is, since you had kind of described that you were with the test group and the test site, so I was thinking that was kind of like the span of what it would take if you guys went down that path. But as you mentioned, it really still is, you're connected to the University of Maryland, and that would be a huge culture change. So yeah, much more challenging. Okay, so thank you. I'll let some other people ask questions.
No problem. One quick footnote for that. I think, as you mentioned it, hypothetically, we're part of University of Maryland, we're part of Department of Aerospace Engineering, but we do have, some degree of autonomy, pardon the pun, as far as like how we run the office, because, we're down in St. Mary's County. We're not really, we're still under the UMD rules, but I mean, we have some, there's some differences with how we operate and what we're approved for it, and like, a couple of those. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. So I guess, in theory, we could, transform our whole office to Agile and have everything set up that way. I don't know if, the rest of Aero or the Clark School might, object to that, or, but anyway, it's an interesting thought, but thank you though. No, great question. So sorry, I'll stop there. Let somebody else ask some questions.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Anyone? Bueller? Going once, going twice. Don't mind me. I'm just, it's late. I'm just, cutting up over here. Any other? Oh, go ahead.
If there aren't other questions, I guess another one that I would find interesting is for what you guys do and the way that you say that you test things, how does it tie into things, like Amazon has a goal of wanting to be able to deliver via drones. How does that type of work, maybe if at all, tie in with what you guys do, or is that completely separate? They do that completely on their own, since you didn't mention private industry. But I was just wondering, are there other groups that do the type of work that you guys do that maybe they would be working with, or do they have to do that on their own? And then where do you see things going from the standpoint of, while the airspace is up there, if all of a sudden at some later time, there's all these drones flying around and stuff up there, I would imagine there's going to be a lot more regulation and things. And so how does that factor into y'all's future plans?
Okay, well, yeah, great questions. I have to say, you really asked a lot of really thoughtful questions so far. Yeah, so for your first question, so companies like Amazon, okay, like Amazon, Uber, Google, I mean, there's a lot of companies, big tech companies that are involved, not just big tech, but also you have like the big aerospace and big defense contractor, even like other, big agriculture, energy utilities. So you have all these, big billion-dollar industries that are kind of in the drone, business, or I would say they're using drones for their business because it's so efficient. It saves them all this money, especially when they scale it. When you have like something that you used to do through a manned inspection, a manned aircraft, and you switch it to a drone, where it's practical, you're saving so much. It's just, it's like a lot of places can't not do it that way, and that's why a lot of stuff has really switched to drones. But so getting back to your question, do we work with Amazon and Google and Uber and all these places? I mean, I would say that, not to my knowledge, we haven't worked with them directly, and I don't know, I guess, all the in and outs of their partnerships. And I know that they, obviously they have lots of their own money. So I think a lot of what their effort comes from is just their own internal R&D, which they're not trying to, they're not necessarily playing nice in the sandbox, so to speak, because they're all like fierce competitors. So I think what really sets us apart, first of all, we're a university, we're a nonprofit, and we're not, we don't really pick favorites. It's like we kind of like play nice with everyone in a sense. It's like if people come to us and they want to, bring up some restrictions or whatever, some sort of business agreement, if they're worried about their intellectual property or something like that, we can accommodate that. But we're not really set up like those companies where they're trying to, they're trying to take market share. They're trying to develop the next big thing and, have it like a worldwide adoption, and billion-dollar new markets and all these types of things. So we're definitely not in that realm. We're set up as a startup to advance sort of the state of the art with unmanned aircraft systems or drones. We kind of like, we partner with people on strategic efforts. Like I was talking about, a really good example of that is Chesapeake UAS Route Network, or Kern. That's very much partnership based. It's not, we kind of are the host of it, but it's like a constellation of all sorts of different people involved, because it doesn't work if it's just us. We, for something like that where you're talking about airspace for a large region over the Chesapeake Bay that's it's shared with multiple governments, military, landowners, stakeholders, so many different people are involved with it that you can't approach you can't tackle a big challenge like that without partnerships, and we do that, I guess, just like anyone else. Uber, Google, and all those places, I'm sure they have a ton of partnerships too. Some in academia. I'm sure there's some of the bigger labs, are very, like out in the West Coast, you have, Stanford and all these places that are very, closely tied in with Google, for example, and a lot of other universities have very close ties with some of these big tech, big ag, some of these people that are trying to, like, be the next, as far as what you were saying about drone deliveries, right? Like everyone's working on that last mile problem now, and they want to be kind of the go-to. Anytime in the future you get something, delivered to you by drone, whether it drops it off with a parachute, or the quadcopter flies down to your doorstep, or your, the little pod that you have set up in your backyard to receive your drone deliveries. It's like, they want to, Amazon or Uber or Google, whoever it is, they want to be the one, it's like they want to basically have the monopoly or the near monopoly, like, so if they develop something, they might share it to some extent, or they might hope it's the standard, but they're not going to, if we develop something, we want to share it. We want the industry, the public, to adopt it and get full benefit from it, and say, hey, now we can do this by drone, and this wasn't even possible, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, but now it's like becoming the new standard, and now it's going to expand to, like, everyone, organ delivery, that's going to be the standard in, I don't know if it'll be 5-10 years, whatever, but it's clearly the way things are going. We showed the proof of concept we're not going to be the ones out there, selling this system to hospitals and organ logistics companies, but somebody is, but we had a part in that. We bootstrapped it. We were kind of there when it started, and then it got handed over to others. So I feel like the stuff with Google, Uber, and all these other people, somebody at some point, created it in a startup environment, whether that was within the company itself or somewhere else. Maybe the company bought them later, because that happens a lot too. So that fed into their current development, but they're just, they're way further along kind of in the development cycle. Plus the way they're organized is clearly, a lot different from the UMD UAS test site. So, I mean, but nothing against them, and not that we wouldn't work with them. If we had an opportunity to collaborate with Uber, Google, or any of the the big tech companies, I mean, it'd be great for us. It would, obviously it would have to fit everyone's requirements and make sense. It's kind of like, why would, if they already had a great thing going and they were already very far along with adoption and and everything else, it's like, why would they add us, other than maybe a PR thing or whatever. What would they really use us for, right? I guess once you get to that point in the development, we're maybe not as needed, or we're not, I guess, as geared to something that's further along with the the stages of market development, I guess you could say. So yeah, I mean, but all those things, I mean, so every organization fills a certain role. I feel like we were created for a certain purpose, and we're kind of kept small and lean because of that. We don't have dozens of engineers churning out drones or radars or whatever. We're like a little, a satellite office of Aero, and we're out in St. Mary's County, flying drones, like doing lots of fun stuff out on the farms and the local parks, getting dirty, and just like, and that's the kind of environment. Every year we get more interns coming in. They come in with these great ideas and concepts, and we help them with those ideas. And then sometimes, so to give you a good example of that, Josh Gauss, he started as an intern. He came back for 2 internships, and then we hired him full time, and he's still going strong. And now he's the intern. Now all the interns come to him. He tells the interns how to revise their quad charts, and how how to rework their research projects and everything. So I mean, so that just goes to show you, we're really focused on building the next big thing, or coming in at the ground floor, getting the sort of the next generation of the drone experts, and sort of advancing the field in that way. And real quick to mention, going back to other places like us. So yes, there's definitely other. So as far as the FAA, there are UAS kind of officially designated test sites. So it's a kind of a long story. I won't really get into all the ins and outs, but we're not actually an official UAS test site, authorized, or as noted by the FAA. However, having said that, we still do a lot of work with FAA, with all these other stakeholders, with the government, with private companies. So it's not like I don't want anyone listening to this talk to think you need some sort of official like FAA seal of approval. That's not how that works. I mean, we, like I said, it does help with certain things, having this sort of official recognition or designation. But we've been involved in all sorts. I really don't think it slowed us down. I mean, like everything I've just talked about. Obviously we're still involved in all sorts of things, and but yes, I mean, there's a lot of other people out there that are working on standards for UAS, air mobility, traffic management, as you mentioned about. So in the future, yes, that is a huge concern. There's going to be a whole sky full of these things, right? If the Googles and Ubers and whoever else of the future get their way, and they say, okay, everything's delivered by drone now because it's cheap and easy, and we have everything's approved, and we have the framework. We can send you a drone, from our distribution center. It'll arrive within 10 minutes. Most of the continental U.S., whatever. Like it's basically like an on-demand thing. You push a button, whatever, and then the drone shows up. Okay, it's like so. Yeah. So yes, I mean that's great on the one hand. On the other hand, you have things like pollution and noise pollution. You have the skies getting blocked out. If you have like people, drones filling the air, crisscrossing the skies all the time. You're not able to go out there and look at the stars, or bird watch or whatever. It's disturbing all these activities that people might not think of, or they might take for granted. So yeah, that's going to be one of the big challenges of setting up a lot of these regulations and coming up with a workable solution for industry, but also for the general public. Because if you get if you advance the technology and you have the regulations catch up, and you kind of get your way, but now you have a sky full of drones and everyone's upset, and they're like, okay, I'm done, ban the drones, no more drones, this is too much, we take it back, we don't want the convenience, et cetera, et cetera. So to avoid coming to that to that kind of situation, you want to involve all these stakeholders early in the process, and they are doing that. I mean, the FAA and a lot of the other stakeholders, they put out rules for comment. There's long comment periods, and there's a lot of back and forth. There's industry, there's the working groups, there's a lot of different people involved, but yeah, that is hopefully there is a technical solution. I don't claim to be, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a pilot, I don't design these deconfliction systems or radar systems, but I know that coming up with a solution to this problem is going to be one of the crucial things. I'd say safety is the highest priority for FAA and pretty much everyone else, but then once you kind of go lower on the sort of list of priorities, then you get to stuff like nuisance, noise pollution, crowding the skies, etc. And I'm sure there are technical ways to address that. Maybe just kind of spitballing. You might have some system where it, in addition to deconflicting airspace, you tell it, okay, keep the the density of drones in this slice of airspace, whatever, to under 1 per whatever unit of volume, something like that. You could design a system where it sort of deconflicted and sort of prevented a swarm or a whole host of drones all kind of landing in the same place at the same time. Is that technically feasible? Is it something that's easy, hard? I leave that to the to the NASA engineers and the other capable techies out there to answer. But I'm just looking at it from a planning, program management standpoint. That's one of the big requirements you have to nail down. And so obviously, I think all of this is going to be going on for years, and FAA is plugging away at the stuff full time, and and it does take them it takes a long time to change any sort of rules with the FAA, so everyone sort of takes that into account. It's not a quick process by any means, although they've definitely tried to accelerate it to the extent that they could to accommodate for all these new technologies with UAS, but it's still not a it's not a warp speed process by any means. So anyway, I'll stop there, but great questions. Thanks again. Those are
thank you. It's definitely a very fluid, evolving environment that you're working in. So those are a lot of, as you said, requirements and constraints that you have to keep in mind.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As it's always changing. Yeah, there's a lot of pivots. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.